The events of today's case began in 1988 in a house in the northern suburbs of Quebec, Canada. The narrator, Silvia, 32, is a property's owner. One plain January day, while she was in the kitchen, she heard a sputtering sound, like something hitting the wall multiple times. She assumed the windows were open and rattling in the wind. Since the sound was coming from the first floor, she went to investigate. That day felt desolate. The sky was heavy with clouds, and no sunlight pierced through. Silvia checked the first room, but the windows were locked. Nothing was there. The noise persisted. Strange, she told herself. Where's that sound coming from? Silvia started getting paranoid, walking slowly as her whole body shivered. The silence was absolute, broken only by the echo of her footsteps on the floor, which made her shiver even more. But the strange noise continued. That day, her kids were where they belonged, some in kindergarten, the rest in school. The father was at work, leaving her alone at home. What could have happened? She asked herself again. Why am I afraid? What made her even more scared was that the sound wasn't coming from outside, but inside the house. It wasn't the noise of the windows rattling, it was happening on the first floor. When she reached for the last room, her hand slipped from the door handle, slick with sweat. The door opened with a long creak. Her heartbeat, the sputtering noise, and the creaking formed a chilling symphony.
Who's there?
Who is that? She whispered. In all the strange events that had happened in Silvia's house, this was the first time the door made such a sound. It used to be perfect and silent. Now, a scene unfolded that froze Silvia in place. Her eyes wide, breath caught. What did she see? The table her husband used to draw on, a drawing table, was slamming against the wall repeatedly, moving entirely on its own. Later, Silvia would say she couldn't recall how long she stood there, staring at the table. The room was dark as night. With a shaking hand, she reached the switch and flipped it on. The light flooded the room, the noise stopped, and the table returned to its place as if nothing had happened. In that moment, Silvia found the courage to run. She bolted towards the stairs, thinking the kitchen would be safer. But as she placed her first step, a rolling noise reached her ears. She pushed the bathroom door open, making another creaking sound, and saw her husband's shaving brush spinning in the sink like a top, endlessly whirling. Silvia's heart lodged in her throat. She slammed the door shut and skipped down the stairs. Only when she reached the kitchen did she gasp for air and sit down, finally exhaling a long, shuddering sigh. Silvia started replaying what had just happened, piece by piece. The noise, the table slamming, and the spinning brush. Am I dreaming? She whispered, pinching herself to confirm she was awake. But were these things just figments of her imagination? Hallucinations? Silvia had always been used to being alone without fear. As a child, her parents left her alone in her remote home until late at night, and she never experienced this kind of fear. Even during thunderstorms, she was unfazed. But that day, what had changed? Claude, Silvia's husband, came back home, and she recounted what had happened. He stared at her for a moment before bursting into laughter. "Are you okay?" he said, a mocking smile on his lips. "If you want to see a doctor, go ahead. Just don't make a scene." He was suggesting a psychiatrist, of course, because he didn't believe her story, dismissing it as the delusions of someone feeling lonely on a dark, solitary day. "Are we really going to make a fuss over some weird noise?" he added. "Maybe there was construction or drilling nearby, making the table move and my shaving brush fall in the sink." With that, the incident was forgotten and brushed aside as mere hallucinations. But less than a week later, Silvia would have a witness, this time her son. That day, Silvia was running the vacuum cleaner over the carpet while her children were playing nearby. She paused when she noticed her son's clothes scattered on the floor and bent down to pick them up. Suddenly, the vacuum cleaner worked to life again on its own. She assumed she hadn't pressed the button firmly, so she walked over and turned it off with extra force. It stopped, but as she turned away, it switched on again. The shock of seeing it run without any input made her freeze. Sylvia approached it and unplugged the cable from the outlet, deciding to let it go and move to another room. Yet, the moment she stepped away, the vacuum cleaner powered up again, unplugged and all. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her and only breathed out in relief when it finally stopped. For 15 long minutes, she kept a watchful eye on it, waiting for another movement. Nothing. She decided to tell Claude, unwilling to face his dismissive reaction again or hear him suggest she see a doctor. But it didn't end there. Silvia noted that the vacuum cleaner would mysteriously start working on its own, even from the closet. She'd rush to stop it each time and tell her children she had simply forgotten to turn it off so as not to scare them. But things were about to get even more complicated when the children became directly involved. One night, Sebastian, Sylvia's son, and Claude were sleeping. The sound of footsteps woke Sebastian, who thought it was his mother pacing the hallway. He often kept his bedroom door open, and now, curious, he got up and walked to the hall. There, he saw a tall woman, draped in a white garment that resembled cigarette smoke, moving slowly. He stared, heart thumping, and realized her eyes were black and hauntingly deep, her face illuminated by a light as dim and cold as a bulb. She passed by him, never breaking eye contact, until her head twisted in a full circle. Then she faded into the wall. Sebastian stood there, paralyzed with fear, and when he finally regained his senses, he felt the warmth of shame as he realized he had wet himself. He bolted to his parents' room, tears streaming down his face, and jumped into their bed, sobbing uncontrollably. His parents woke up in alarm. "What's wrong? What happened? Are you okay?" they asked, concern in their voices. Between hiccuping sobs, Sebastian recounted what he had just seen. Claude, however, was quick to blame Silvia. "You've made the kids paranoid with your stories, and now they're having hallucinations too," he said. But deep down, doubt crept in, a nagging thought that perhaps something paranormal was indeed haunting their home. He chose to ignore it, dismissing the notion before it took root. At this point, Claude found himself at the brink of belief, no matter what his logical mind insisted. One night, Claude was sleeping alone in the bedroom. Silvia had taken to sleeping with Sebastian, since he could no longer fall asleep alone after seeing the woman. Claude drifted in and out of slumber until a noise stirred him. A faint sound of footsteps. He tried to brush it off, but then noticed something unmistakable, the door handle turning, slowly and deliberately. A chill ran down his spine as the door creaked open, letting in a sliver of moonlight from the window at the end of the hallway. Claude sat up, heart pounding, and cautiously stepped toward the door. Before he could reach it, it slammed shut with force that made the floorboards tremble. He yanked it open and peered into the dim hallway. "Who's there?" he called, voice barely steady. A fleeting figure caught his eye before vanishing into the shadows. Claude's breath quickened. For the first time, he felt genuine fear, a fear that gnawed at the foundation of his disbelief. He thought of telling Silvia, but hesitated. If he did, she would be convinced that what was happening was real, and it would only heighten her terror and that of the children. He decided to stay silent, waiting to see if anything else would happen. And, as fate would have it, it did. Early March brought a weather report of an impending mild storm. Claude and Silvia heard the warnings on the news, a caution to keep children indoors after dark. That night, the sky turned ink black, hiding even the outlines of their hands. Trees swayed violently, their leaves whispering and crackling as the wind howled, carrying with it an eerie murmuring sound that made one's skin prickle, like a chorus of wolves weaving through the chaos. Soon, the mild storm turned into a fierce tempest. Rain pelted the earth, thunder cracked between sky and ground, and trees splintered under nature's fury. The wind snatched anything light enough to be caught in its grasp. Bicycles, forgotten laundry, empty boxes, all spun away as if weightless. Inside, Claude and Silvia huddled with their children. The heater on high as they sought warmth and safety, all sharing a room in case the worst happened. The storm raged through the night, a spectacle of raw power as the hail, large as ice cubes, battered the roof and windows. The dim glow of their lanterns barely cut through the shadows, and the thunder served as a stand-in for candlelight, striking sudden brightness into the room. Hours passed, and at some point deep in the night, a sharp bark split through the sounds of the storm, waking Claude. Their dog, who usually slept in the living room, seemed to be outside. Claude quietly rose, careful not to wake Silvia and the children, and crept downstairs. The question nagged at him, why would the dog go out in this storm? Even stranger was the fact the doors were all locked. His first shock came when he peeked into the living room and saw the dog was missing from its usual spot. "Where did he go?" he whispered, straining to hear the bark again. But the storm swallowed any sound. All the windows were shut tight, and there was no way to check outside with the storm ripping through everything in sight. Claude took a couple of steps up the stairs when he saw Silvia standing at the top, her nightgown illuminated like a ghostly figure. His heart skipped before he recognized her. "Why are you up?" she asked, her voice soft but wary. "I heard the dog barking outside," he replied. "I came down to look for him, but he's not here. I'm going to check the first floor. Maybe he's with Sebastian." Silvia's eyes widened. "The dog? He's behind you." Claude turned around, and there he was, curled up and sleeping peacefully in his usual spot. Claude's face paled. "What? Am I losing my mind now too? I could have sworn he wasn't here, and that the barking came from outside." They exchanged a glance of mutual unease, but chose to not wake the children or argue. They slipped back into bed, tension crackling between them as the storm roared on. Neither of them found true sleep after that, only restless silence filled with the orchestra of nature's fury, whistling winds, groaning trees, and the sudden, eerie solo of a wolf howling like an operatic Pavarotti echoing into the night.